On Tuesday morning, May 4th, 2010, Edinburgh woke up as usual. Buses streamed in, delivering people to work. Cafes began to fill. The ancient cobblestone streets bustled with the rhythmic flow of people starting a new day. Amidst this peaceful scene, a 38-year-old woman got off a bus in the city center. She went into her usual Sainsbury's supermarket to buy a snack, as was her daily routine. No one in the store paid attention to her. She was just a regular customer with a gentle smile and a peaceful demeanor. That woman's name was Suzanne Pilley. Just minutes before, Suzanne had sent a text message to her mother. The message didn't encourage increased anxiety or unease. On the contrary, her tone was optimistic. She talked about the new man she was getting to know, about how life felt like it was finally entering a new chapter after a turbulent period. No one could have imagined that it would be one of the last messages Suzanne sent to her family. After leaving the supermarket, she walked down the familiar Thistle Street. It was only a few hundred meters, a distance she walked every day. Security cameras captured Suzanne walking toward her workplace. She was impeccably dressed in business attire, carrying her shopping bag. Everything seemed perfectly normal. That was the last time anyone saw Suzanne alive. Just about 20 minutes later, the punctual woman vanished from everyone's lives in an unbelievable way. No cries for help, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, not a drop of blood. Even years later, the police couldn't find her body. This is what makes the Suzanne Pilley case one of the most controversial mysteries in Scottish judicial history. A man was eventually convicted of her murder, despite the lack of a body, a murder weapon, and a confession. The entire verdict was constructed from seemingly small pieces: screen time, unusual actions, witness testimony, and a host of details that, when pieced together, created a completely different picture. To understand why this case captivated the entire UK for so many years, we need to go back to Suzanne's life before that fateful day. Suzanne was born and raised in Edinburgh. Those who knew her remembered her as a friendly, trustworthy, and energetic woman. She loved hiking, cycling, camping, and outdoor activities. To her family and friends, Suzanne was the kind of person who always kept her promises, cared for others, and rarely let negative emotions affect her life. After a failed marriage, Suzanne didn't give up hope of building a family. She continued to work hard, stabilize her life, and spend time with her parents. She lived alone in a small apartment in Sawton with a cat and a few fish tanks. Her life was simple but peaceful. Around the late 2000s, Suzanne worked as an accountant at Infrastructure Managers Limited, or IML. In the office, she was considered an exemplary employee, rarely taking time off and always completing her work on time. Colleagues appreciated her not only for her professionalism, but also for her open and sociable personality. No one could have imagined that this very workplace would become the starting point for a series of events leading to tragedy. At IML, Suzanne met a man named David Gilroy. At the time, no one knew that this seemingly ordinary encounter between two colleagues would be the beginning of one of Scotland's most famous missing person cases. And from here, the first signs of a haunting relationship began to appear. By the morning of May 5, 2010, more than 24 hours after Suzanne Pilley disappeared, The investigation truly accelerated. Officers went to her apartment to thoroughly examine the scene and interview relatives. This delay was later considered one of the most regrettable aspects of the case, because if Suzanne was indeed the victim of a crime, the first day is always the golden time for gathering evidence. While the police were still trying to piece together what had happened the previous morning, David Gilroy informed his colleagues that he would be going on a business trip to Lochilphead, in the Argyll region, to inspect a project related to a school sports field. What caught the investigators' attention was that none of his colleagues remembered having been notified in advance about this trip. It appeared almost suddenly, right around the time Suzanne had been reported missing. Initially, the trip seemed unremarkable, but just a few days later, it became one of the most crucial links in the entire case. While Gilroy was driving, the police learned of his relationship with Suzanne through emails and statements from acquaintances. They immediately contacted him, asking him to report to Corstorphine police station upon his return to Edinburgh. Gilroy agreed. He said he would be there around 9:30 p.m., but that time passed, and he still hadn't shown up. At 10:15 p.m., Gilroy finally returned to the Edinburgh area. When the police called again, he said he was still near Stirling, and it would take him another 45 minutes to get there. This delay prompted investigators to begin questioning. Traffic cameras later revealed a very inexplicable delay in Gilroy's journey. The stretch between Tindrum and Inverarray, which should have taken only about 36 minutes, stretched to nearly 2 hours and 40 minutes. Where was David Gilroy during those 2 hours? What was he doing? To this day, there is no convincing answer. On May 6th, Gilroy underwent an interrogation that lasted over 11 hours. He denied any involvement in Suzanne's disappearance. According to Gilroy, the trip to Argyll was purely business. He also recounted the story of the farewell ceremony they had performed a few days earlier, asserting that the relationship had ended peacefully and without any conflict. But while that testimony was being verified, another detail completely diverted the investigation. On May 7th, Gilroy was asked to have his hands photographed for forensic examination. The technician quickly noticed a thick layer of skin-colored cosmetic applied to his skin. When asked to wash it off, Gilroy only rubbed it superficially, as if unwilling to remove the cream. After thorough cleaning, experts discovered several parallel, curved scratches on the back of his hands and wrists, as well as other injuries on his arms, chest, and forehead. Gilroy could not provide a convincing explanation for the origin of these injuries. For the investigators, they immediately became a noteworthy detail, even though they couldn't prove anything on their own. A few days later, the police decided to deploy sniffer dogs specializing in detecting the scent of human remains. These were Springer Spaniels, specially trained and having assisted in many major investigations. The results surprised the entire investigative team. The dogs reacted in 3 locations. First, the underground garage of the IML building on Thistle Street. Second, a small alcove near the basement door. And finally, the trunk of David Gilroy's silver Vauxhall Vectra. When the car was taken for examination, forensic experts discovered even more unusual signs. Inside the trunk, there was a very strong smell of air freshener, as if it had just been sprayed or thoroughly cleaned. Police also determined that after leaving the office on the day Suzanne disappeared, Gilroy had purchased air fresheners. The purchase of air fresheners itself is not evidence of a crime, but when combined with the dog's reactions and Gilroy's repeated visits to the underground garage that day, all the details began to piece together a picture that investigators could not ignore. A technical inspection of the Vectra revealed further anomalies. The shock absorber system showed signs of malfunction. Cracks. The undercarriage had numerous scratches. A lot of vegetation and dirt were stuck under the chassis, indicating the vehicle had traveled over rough terrain. More importantly, fuel and mileage data showed the car had traveled an additional 124 miles, which David Gilroy couldn't explain. From this point on, the investigation shifted from focusing on where Suzanne had disappeared to the investigators' objective became another question. Where did David Gilroy take Suzanne's body during the more than 2 hours she was missing in the Argyll wilderness? In the summer of 2010, as large-scale searches continued throughout the Argyll region, investigators became increasingly convinced that Suzanne Pilley was no longer alive. Hundreds of police officers, mountain rescue teams, and volunteers scoured the dense forests, hillsides, and lakeside areas, particularly the stretch of road between Tindrum and Inverare, where David Gilroy had spent more than 2 hours, inexplicably missing during his trip. But it all ended in silence. No clothes, no DNA, no body parts. Suzanne had vanished completely. Despite this, the investigators didn't stop. They began piecing together small pieces of evidence, colleague testimonies, camera footage, communication history, David Gilroy's visits to the underground garage, the Vauxhall Vectra, the wounds on his hands, the reactions of the police dogs, and especially the mysterious disappearance during his trip to Argyll. For the police, each individual detail was insufficient to draw a conclusion, but when put together, they began to form a chain of events that could hardly be attributed to mere coincidence. Coincidentally, on June 23, 2010, just 7 weeks after Suzanne disappeared, David Gilroy was officially arrested and charged with murder. The following day, he appeared in court at Edinburgh Sheriff Court and was subsequently released on bail pending trial. Shortly afterward, Gilroy was dismissed by IML. However, throughout the investigation, he maintained his innocence and denied all charges. It wasn't until nearly 2 years later, in February 2012, that David Gilroy's trial officially began at the Edinburgh High Court. This was one of the rare trials where the prosecution had almost no direct evidence. No body was found, no murder weapon was found, no witnesses to the attack. No Suzanne DNA was found in the basement or in Gilroy's car. The entire case was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. Throughout the nearly month-long trial, prosecutors systematically reconstructed the events of May 4, 2010. They argued that Suzanne had arrived at the office as usual. David Gilroy was also present. Shortly after Suzanne disappeared from the cameras, Gilroy appeared near the stairs leading down to the basement garage. He returned to the area several times that morning. Then, unexpectedly, he took his car with what appeared to be an unconvincing excuse. A few days later, police dogs accurately identified the scene in the garage, in the basement alcove, and in the trunk. The vehicle also showed signs of having traveled on rough terrain, along with an unexplained distance of over 124 miles. According to the prosecution, examining each detail individually may not be sufficient. The allegations are serious, but when all the pieces are put together, the possibility of them being mere coincidences seems impossible. Meanwhile, the defense focuses on a single argument. There is no direct evidence. No one saw Suzanne being attacked. No one saw the body. No forensic examination confirmed she was ever in the garage or trunk. Therefore, according to the defense attorney, it is impossible to convict someone based solely on assumptions. Even David Gilroy's wife was summoned to court. However, she exercised her legal right to refuse to testify against her husband. Gilroy himself did not testify before the jury. After hearing all the testimony, the jury did not make a decision immediately. They spent 3 days considering each piece of evidence. Approximately 8 hours of deliberation took place in closed session. This was a sign that this was not an easy verdict. Finally, on March 15, 2012, the jury found David Gilroy guilty by a majority vote. He was convicted of murdering Suzanne Pilley and willfully obstructing justice. A month later, Lord Bracadale judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a minimum sentence of 18 years before parole. During sentencing, the judge made a remark that silenced the entire courtroom. He said that David Gilroy appeared to be the only one who knew where Suzanne Pilley was, and he hoped that one day Gilroy would tell the truth, so that Suzanne's family could take her home. But that never happened. To this day, David Gilroy maintains his innocence, and Suzanne Pilley has yet to be found. On April 18, 2012, when David Gilroy was sentenced to life imprisonment, many believed the Suzanne Pilley case was finally closed. But in reality, it was only the end of the trial. For Suzanne's family, the journey to find the truth never ended. Because after all the investigations, months of trial, and the sentence for the perpetrator, there remains a big question that no one can answer. Where is Suzanne Pilley? David Gilroy quickly filed an appeal. He argued that the police had treated him unfairly during questioning, and that his legal rights had not been fully protected as a suspect. However, at the end of 2012, the Scottish Court of Appeal rejected all of these arguments and upheld the sentence. In the following years, Gilroy continued to try to overturn the case through various legal procedures, but all failed. Even so, he always breathing. He maintained his stance. I am innocent. To this day, David Gilroy has never admitted to murdering Suzanne Pilley. What makes this case one of the most unusual in British judicial history is not just the victim's disappearance, but the fact that it was a murder conviction based almost entirely on a series of circumstantial evidence. No body, no murder weapon, no victim's DNA, no direct witnesses. Instead, the jury had to consider dozens of seemingly unrelated details. The time Suzanne disappeared, David Gilroy's appearances in the underground garage, the unexplained Vauxhall Vectra with over 124 miles on the odometer, the wounds on his hands, the reaction of the police dogs, the mysterious hours of disappearance in Argyll. No single detail was enough to convict. But when all were pieced together, the jury believed they formed a logical chain that was very difficult to refute. Besides the evidence, another element frequently mentioned at trial was David Gilroy's behavior before Suzanne's disappearance. According to the case file, Suzanne had told friends that Gilroy was frequently jealous and showed signs of controlling her life. Investigators discovered that in the last month of their relationship, Gilroy contacted Suzanne approximately 400 times via text and phone. Even more noteworthy was that after Suzanne disappeared, that contact abruptly ceased. No more calls, no more text messages, no more attempts to find the woman he had previously been almost inseparable from. For the investigators, this change in behavior was a crucial detail. A truly worried person would usually try to communicate more, rather than remain completely silent. Meanwhile, the search teams continued their work for years. They expanded the search area across the Argyll region. Hundreds of police officers, numerous rescue teams in the mountains. Even during the search for Suzanne, they discovered 6 other sets of remains unrelated to the case. But Suzanne was still not found. The greatest tragedy perhaps belongs to her family. Suzanne's father died in 2019 without ever knowing where his daughter was buried. He once shared that sometimes, when he saw a woman who looked like Suzanne in a supermarket or on the street, he unconsciously thought it was his daughter. Then, just seconds later, he had to face the heartbreaking truth. Suzanne would never be able to return home again. However, Suzanne's story not only left behind pain, it also changed Scottish law. By 2026, the Scottish government enacted a regulation commonly known as the Suzanne Law. According to this regulation, when considering pardons for convicted murderers who refuse to disclose the location of the victim's body, the pardon board must consider that silence a crucial factor in its decision. This law cannot force David Gilroy to confess, nor can it bring Suzanne back to her family. But at least, it ensures that silence will no longer be meaningless before the law. As early as 2024, Scottish police continued to appeal to the public for information. They believed that if just one witness recalled seeing David Gilroy's silver Vauxhall Vectra on a secluded road in Argyll in early May 2010, the search area could be significantly narrowed. This shows that, even after so many years, investigators haven't given up hope of finding Suzanne. On the morning of May 4, 2010, Suzanne Pilley left home like everyone else. She carried with her plans for the future, a new love, a new life, and the belief that she had finally closed the chapter on her past. But she never made it to the courtroom. 16 years have passed. The verdict has been delivered. The law has changed. But what Suzanne's family most longed for has yet to come true. It wasn't another trial, not a harsher sentence. It was simply to bring her home. That's why the Suzanne Pilley case is still remembered as one of Scotland's most mysterious disappearances and murders, where a woman vanished in a matter of minutes in broad daylight, and the truth ultimately remains known only to one person. What do you think led to Suzanne Pilley's disappearance? And why was the investigation, which had dragged on for years, finally expedited? Leave your thoughts below and subscribe to True Crime PV to continue following real-life criminal cases analyzed through evidence, psychology, and investigation. Because behind every case, there's more than just a verdict. There's always a victim, a real person. And the woman in today's story is Suzanne Pilley.